Jane Parker never expected a simple checkup to turn her life upside down. She sat on the clinic bed, swinging her legs, waiting for the doctor to return. It was just a routine visit, nothing too serious, she thought. Meanwhile, in another room, Dr. Eric Brown was moving too fast. The clinic was unstaffed and he had too many patients to attend to. His eyes darted from one file to another, barely registering names. In rush, he picked up the wrong string, the one meant for the billionaire surrogate. Jane winced slightly as the needle pierced her skin. "That was quick," she said with a small smile. Dr. Brown forced a tired chuckle. "You are all set, just a routine injection." He had no idea the horrible mistake he had just made. As Jane walked out of the clinic, everything felt normal. The sun was shining, people were laughing, life moved on as usual. But inside her body, something had already begun, something that should never have happened. Michael Smith leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the framed ultrasound picture of failed attempt. He had everything: wealth, power, a mansion most people could only dream of. But the one thing he wanted more than anything had always been out of reach: a child. His wife, Jenny, walked in, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Michael, they just called from the clinic." Her eyes shone with excitement. The procedure was successful. Michael exhaled, rubbing his hands. Finally, after all these years, Jenny sat beside him, squeezing his hand. "In few months, we all have our baby. Everything is perfect." But it wasn't perfect at all. The clinic had made a terrible mistake. Their baby wasn't growing in their choosing surrogate. It was growing inside a complete stranger. Days passed as Jane started feeling off. At first, it was just small things: mild noses, tiredness, cravings for food she didn't usually like. "It's probably stress," she told herself. But by the second week, it was impossible to ignore. She felt sick every morning. Her emotions were all over the place. Worst of all, she felt different in a way she couldn't explain. One afternoon, she met her best friend Lisa at their favorite cafe. "You look exhausted," Lisa said, stirring her iced coffee. "Are you okay?" Jane sighed, rubbing her forehead. "I don't know. I feel weird. I'm always tired and I keep feeling nauseous." Lisa gave her a sharp look. "Jane, when was your last period?" Jane blinked. Her eyes raised. She grabbed her phone and checked the date. Her heart nearly stopped. She was late. Jane couldn't stop thinking about what Lisa said. When was your last period? It echoed in her mind as she sat in her small apartment that evening. The room felt too quiet, as she felt too alone. She reached for her phone and googled the signs of pregnancy. Tiredness, mood swings. Jane's eyes widened as she read. She did shake off their every symptoms. She immediately grabbed a pregnancy test, her hand shaking as she opened the box. As she waited for the result, her mind raced. Could she really be pregnant? But how? She wasn't even with anyone. The test was simple, just 2 lines on the plastic stick. But for Jane, the result was like a bomb going off. She was pregnant. She stared at the test for a long time, her breath shallow. How? Why? She couldn't shake the thought. Something had gone terribly wrong at the clinic. Dr. Brown sat in his office, reviewing the paperwork from the day's patient. He glanced at Jane's file. Something about it seemed off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Then he saw the name, Michael Smith. His eyes widened. Michael Smith was one of the wealthiest men in the country. He knew the billionaire had been using the clinic for surrogacy, but the file that he had on Jane was different. In a flash, it hit him. The mistake he had made earlier. the mix-up between Jane Parker and the surrogacy patient. He froze. If what he was thinking was true, the billionaire sperm had been injected into Jane, a complete stranger. Panic gripped Dr. Brown. He had to tell someone, but what if no one believed him? What if he had lost everything? He had no choice but to contact the clinic head, Dr. Harris, and explain the situation. Meanwhile, Jenny Smith had a strange feeling too. She had been excited about the surrogacy process, but the closer the due date got, the more nervous she felt. She had spent so many years imagining this moment. Was everything really going to go as smoothly as they hoped? She thought. Her husband Michael tried to comfort her. It's fine, Jenny. Everything is under control. But Jenny couldn't shake off the thought that something might be wrong. Are you sure the clinic is doing everything right? She asked. We have spent so much money on this. What if there is a mistake? Michael kissed her forehead. Nothing is going on. We'll all be parents soon. I promise. But deep down, Jenny had a nagging feeling that this wouldn't be as easy as they thought. The next morning, Jane was sitting in her favorite scarf, trying to wrap her head around everything. She had messaged Lisa, but her best friend wasn't available. Her phone rang and she picked it up without checking the number. Hello, this is Jane Parker, she said. Miss Parker, this is Dr. Brown from the clinic. We need to talk, it's urgent. Jane had skipped a beat. What was this about? She had no idea what was coming. But Dr. Brown was also curious. Dr. Brown, what's this about? Is everything okay? Please come in as soon as possible. I will explain everything when you arrive. His voice was full of tension. Jane's palm grew sweaty. Something was definitely wrong, and it had everything to do with that visit to the clinic. When Jane walked into the clinic, Dr. Brown was waiting for her in a small private room. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. He avoided looking her in the eyes. Dr. Brown, what's going on? Jane asked, her voice shaking. He sighed deeply, his hand trembling. Miss Parker, I have to be honest with you. There was a mix-up during your appointment. The procedure you underwent was meant for someone else, someone very important. Jane's eyes widened. What do you mean? What's happening? Dr. Brown hesitated, then said, the sperm I injected in you, it was from a billionaire's named Michael Smith. Jane's mind went blank. What? No, that's impossible. Dr. Brown stood up, pacing nervously. I can't explain how it happened, but it did. You are pregnant with his child, not through any normal means, but by mistake. This was never supposed to happen. Jane's heart raised. Her life had just been turned upside down. Jane stood frozen, her hand clutching the edge of the chair. The world around her felt distant, like a bad dream. She couldn't escape. Her mind screamed in disbelief. A billionaire's sperm. She felt like she was suffocating, her chest tightening with every breath. This can't be real, she whispered to herself, shaking her head. I am not carrying his child. I don't even know him. Dr. Brown took a closer step, his face full of guilt and regret. I know this sounds impossible, Miss Parker, but it's the truth. You need to understand, this wasn't planned. It wasn't supposed to happen. Her voice cracked as she stood up. What am I supposed to do now? Huh? You are telling me I am carrying someone else's child? I didn't even choose this. Her word came out like a scream, full of raw emotion. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She wouldn't let him see her cry. "I don't even know who he is," she said softly. "I don't know what to do." Dr. Brown looked at her with sadness. "I can help you figure this out. We can fix this." "Fix it?" Jane scoffed. "How do you fix a mistake like this?" Her whole life had been shattered in an instant. She had always imagined a future that was hers, her choice, her plan. Now she felt like she was being dragged into someone else's life, a life she didn't want to be part of. Meanwhile, at the Smith mansion, Michael and Jenny were sitting in the living room, both tense and silent. The weeks had passed, but Jenny couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. "Michael, I can't ignore this anymore. The clinic hasn't sent us any updates in days," she said, her voice trembling with anxiety. "I need to know if something is okay." Michael clenched his jaw, trying to remain calm. "Jenny, we have been over this. The procedure is fine. We just have to wait." But Jenny wasn't convinced. "I feel like we are being kept in the dark. There's something off about this whole thing," her mind racing. They had spent so much money, put so much effort in this child, and now she was doubting if it was going to work. "I'm going to call the clinic," she said, standing up. "I can't just wait around and pretend everything is fine." Michael grabbed her wrist gently. "Don't, Jenny. Let me handle it. I'll make sure we get answers." But his own voice lacked confidence, and deep down, he feared the same thing his wife did. That the world surrogacy process had gone terribly wrong. That evening, Jenny sat on her bed, thinking about what Michael had said to her. Her mind not settled about the surrogacy process. Jane, on the other hand, sat on her bed, her legs pulled to her chest as she stared at the phone in her hand. She had texted Lisa, but her friend was still unavailable. She had no one to talk to, no one she could understand. The phone rang again, and Jane jumped at the sound. She glanced at the screen. It was the clinic, Dr. Brown. Tears sprang to her eyes as she picked up the phone. "Hello?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Miss Parker, it's Dr. Brown again. I have spoken to Mr. Smith, the father of the child you are carrying." "What? You told him?" "I don't even know him. I don't want this." Her word came out in a punkish rush. There was a long pause. Dr. Brown's voice was soft at this time. "He is aware of the situation now, and he wants to meet with you. He wants to talk about how to handle this." Jane's heart raised. This was real. She was really carrying his child. "Tell him to leave me alone," she snapped, slamming the phone down. But deep down, she knew she couldn't run from this. It was already too late. The next day, Jane reluctantly agreed to meet with Michael Smith. She had never met him before, but the thought of seeing him in person was enough to make her stomach churn. What would he be like? Was he angry? Did he even care? When she arrived at the restaurant, she saw him immediately. Michael Smith, in a sharp suit, sitting in a table in the corner. His face was calm, but his eyes were full of tension. She couldn't tell if he was angry or just trying to keep it together. Michael stood up when he saw her. "Miss Parker," he said, her voice in an angry way. "Thank you for meeting me here." Jane didn't answer right away. She couldn't bring herself to say anything. Instead, she sat down, her hands trembling in her lap. He sat back down across from her, studying her carefully. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his voice softer now, "but I am not here to make things worse. I just want to figure out how we can move on." Jane's voice broke as she spoke. "You don't understand. I never asked for this. I didn't choose any of this. I am just a stranger in this whole situation. I don't know what you want from me." Michael felt softened, and for the first time, Jane saw something other than coldness, regret. I'm not trying to control you, Jane, he said quietly. I just don't know what to do either. This wasn't how it's supposed to be, but now we have to figure it out. Jane looked away, her heart aching with every word. She had never imagined her life would go like this. She was carrying a child she didn't want for a man she didn't know. The meeting with Michael Smith left Jane feeling drained. The tension between them was thick, like a heavy fog that neither of them could escape. She couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. He seemed so calm, so in control, but Jane knew that underneath that calm facade was a man whose entire life has just been turned upside down, just like hers. At home, she sat on the couch, her hand resting on her stomach. For the first time, she actually felt the weight of what was happening. A child that was not hers, yet it was growing inside her. She couldn't even imagine what it would be like to raise the child. She wasn't ready for motherhood. She wasn't even sure she wanted to be a mother. And yet, this life inside her was real, and it was tied to a man she barely knew. Her phone buzzed and her heart skipped. It was another message from Michael. I understand this is difficult. If you ever needed to talk, please let me know. Jane stared at the screen. She had no idea how to respond. She wasn't sure what he wanted from her. The next morning, Jane woke up to a knock at her door. She wasn't expecting anyone, but when she opened it, she was shocked to see Dr. Brown standing there. Dr. Brown, she asked, confused. What are you doing here? He looked uneasy, glancing around the hallway before stepping inside. I know this is a strange visit, but I need to talk to you. There is something else you need to know. Jane's stomach twisted. What now? Dr. Brown hesitated before speaking. The situation with Michael is more complicated than I thought. He's been under a lot of pressure lately. He didn't tell you, but I was hoping the child could help with this family legacy. There is a lot at stake for him. Jane felt a wave of frustration. Why are you telling me this? I don't care about his family legacy. I don't care about anything. I care about my life. Dr. Brown sighed, clearly uncomfortable. I understand, but you need to understand the gravity of this situation. You may not want this child, but Michael, he sees it as his last hope. Jane's words spun. She didn't know whether to feel sympathy or anger. She wasn't just carrying a child, she was part of someone else's plan. Over the next few days, Jane wrestled with the truth. She was pregnant but did everything. But did that mean she had to become a part of Michael's life? Her heart was heavy with questions, and every time she thought about the future, it felt like a storm cloud was hanging over her. She spent hours scrolling through the internet, trying to find some kind of answer. Should she keep the child? Should she try to get an abortion? But how could she make a decision like this? Her emotions were all over the place. She couldn't stop thinking about the child growing inside her. She had never imagined this, being the center of someone else's dream, someone else's future. One evening, as they sat on the couch, staring at her reflection in the mirror, she heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find Michael standing there holding a small bucket of flour. Michael, what are you doing here? She asked, her voice trembling. I wanted to talk, he said softly, stepping inside. I have been thinking about you and the situation. I know this is unfair to you, but I want to make it right. She frowned. Make it right? How? You can't fix this. Michael took a deep breath. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. I'm not asking you to be my wife or anything crazy. I just want to be there for you and the child. I don't want you to feel like this anymore. I don't want you to feel lonely again. Jane stared at him, her emotion torn. She couldn't decide what to feel. Sympathy? anger, or something else entirely. As the weeks passed, the situation grew even more complicated. Jane couldn't shake the feeling that she was caught in a web of lies, miscommunication, and merciless hope. Michael and Jenny kept texting her, calling her, trying to stay in touch. They had started to send her gifts, trying to be kind, but it only made Jane feel like a stranger in her own life. One night, Jane broke down in front of her mirror, tears falling uncontrollable. "What am I supposed to do?" she sobbed. "I don't know what I want anymore. I don't know who I am anymore." Her phone rang again. This time it was Jenny. Jane hesitated but decided to answer. "Jane, it's Jenny. I've been trying to reach you. I know this is difficult, but we are all in this together. I don't want you to feel like an outsider." Jane's breath hinged. "You want me to feel like I'm part of your family?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "What about my family? What about me?" Jane's voice softened. "We are not trying to take over your life. We just want to be there for you. I don't want you to go through this alone." The days were blending into each other. Jane found herself stuck in an endless cycle of appointments, phone call, and awkward silence. She didn't know who she was anymore. Every choice she made seemed to hurt someone else, and yet the baby inside her continued to grow, a constant reminder that the world she once knew was no longer hers. One afternoon, as Jane sat on her balcony, looking out over the city, Dr. Brown called again. "I need to see you," he said urgently. "It's about Michael." Jane felt a surge of dread. "What now?" "There's something you need to know. Michael's family is pressuring him to make a decision about the child. They want to take full control of the situation. He's under a lot of pressure." Jane felt her heart dropped. Everything was out of control. She wasn't just carrying a child. She was being dragged into a game of power, money, and manipulation. As weeks dragged on, each day blending into the next, Jane was exhausted physically and emotionally. The constant attention from Michael, his family, and Jane was overwhelming. Everywhere she went, it felt like there were no escapes from the reality she didn't want. The pregnancy that had started as a terrifying accident now felt like a reminder that her life was no longer her own. One afternoon, as she sat on her bed, looking through the texts from Michael and Jenny, a wave of frustration overtook her. They were so kind, so thoughtful, but it felt suffocating. She couldn't understand why they kept pushing her to be involved in their lives. She didn't know them, and yet they kept insisting that she should be part of their world. "Why can't they just leave me alone?" Jane whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why do they think I want to be part of this mess?" Her phone buzzed again. It was another message from Michael. "Jane, we are thinking about you. We want to meet you." Tears filled her eyes as she read the messages. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for any of this, but there were no way to stop it now. The decision was already out of hand. That evening, Jane stood in front of the mirror, her hand resting on her swollen belly. It was strange how quickly the baby had grown, and yet she couldn't feel anything attached to it. She should have been excited, happy even, but instead there was only a heavy weight on her chest. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked the reflection, staring back at her. She had tried to push the thoughts away, but now they flooded her mind. The truth was, she couldn't decide what to do with the baby. Abortion, keep the baby. Both choices seemed impossible. Keeping the baby meant a lifetime of responsibility, a lifetime tied to a family she didn't know and didn't choose. But giving the baby up meant losing a part of her, a part that had already begun to grow inside her, even though she didn't want it to. She slumped against the sink, her shoulders shake with sob. Her life had become battle between what she wanted and what everyone else wanted from her. The doorbell rang and Jane wiped her tears quickly, trying to compose herself. She wasn't ready for anyone to see her like this. but there were no hiding from the world anymore. When Jane opened the door, she didn't expect to see Michael and Janie standing there, both with solemn expressions. Michael stepped forward, holding a small box in his hands. Will Jane find a way out of all this pressure and drama? Would she be able to take back full control? Stay tuned for more episodes. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and more especially turn on the notification bell so whenever I upload the next episode of this story, you will get notified. Thank you.